So we can begin by creating a variable called counter that we're just going to set to 0. So counter is now 0. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use this while statement, and inside here we're going to say while, so as long as counter is less than 10, then what we want to do is we want to do something. And of course this would be an infinite loop if we didn't do anything to count, of course, because count is always going to be less than 10 unless we do something to counter. So what we want to do really is we want to increase counter by 1, and if you remember if you've watched my video on operators, then you know that this is just equivalent to counter equals counter plus 1. So what we're going to do with every loop, every iteration, is we're going to increase counter by 1, and eventually counter will become equal to 10, and then it won't execute the loop and will exit. So that's how that's going to work. We want this to be at the end really, so we're going to start at 0 because we want 10 loops. So in here we can put something now, and all I'm going to actually do is use this print statement, and what we could say is counter, and we'll just say colon, it's going to be equal to something. Now we can actually print this in multiple ways. So actually I could do that just to show you. One way we can print this is we can say we can print this line like so. Alternatively, and these are all going to give us the same values, of course, because counter is still 0 at this point. So counter is 0 here, counter is going to be 0 here, and it's going to be 0 all the way until we increment it by 1, of course. So the second thing we could do is we could convert counter to a string, because right now it's an integer, and then we can concatenate the strings, which is just bringing them together. So we can say print counter, as in our string, and then plus the actual string, the value of our counter converted to a string. And we can also, and my favourite way really, and I think the neatest way to actually print something, is to say, look, we're going to have a counter like this, and then what we do is we use curly brackets, and curly brackets is essentially a placeholder. So this is going to be the placeholder for where we're going to put counter, and the way we do that is we use this dot format. So the string now becomes this object with a method called format, and inside here now we put counter. And what's really cool about this, and the reason I think it's so neat, is because what you could do is you could actually just have a bunch of these, and then, you know, if we wanted to, this is going to print, we could print counter, counter, counter. So if we just execute this, this is going to be a lot of text, but that's okay. We could actually just make 10 smaller, that way we can actually see what's going on. So of course what's going to happen, just to talk through it again, counter is going to start off at 0 here, which is less than 3, so it's going to go into this loop. We're going to print 0, we're going to print 0, we're going to print 0, 0, 0, then we're going to add 1. Now counter's 1, so we're going to go back up here. Is counter still 1? Yes. And so long this is true, we're going to keep printing, and what's going to happen is we're going to get this value here will become, so when it's 2, it's going to say yes, 2 is less than 3, so it's going to go into this loop and print all our statements. Then counter is going to become 3, and then for the final time we're going to come up here to this while loop and say while counter is less than 3, then go back into it, but counter is going to be equal to 3, so what's going to happen is it's not going to execute. So we're going to get 3 executions. Counter is going to be 0, counter is going to be 1, and counter is going to be 2, and then that's it. So let's go ahead now and execute that. We want Python 3 basics.py, and then as you can see it's exactly what we expected. So everything is 0 on the first iteration, then everything is 1 on the second iteration. We've clearly left a different spacing, and then everything is 2 on the third iteration. So if you watched my video on if statements, what we could do now is we could actually go ahead and put an if statement inside this while loop in the same way that we nested our if statements in that video. So instead now we're nesting this if statement inside a while loop. So if we begin, we're saying while counter is less than 3, then do something. And what we're going to do is we're going to say if counter, if counter is equal to 2. Remember my video on operators, this is saying if counter is the same as the value 2, which will happen eventually. What we're going to say, we could just say end, because we know that if counter equals 2 here, then it's going to equal 3 here, and it's never going to come back into this loop. And something else we could do is, you know, if counter is equal to 0, then what we want to do is we want to print start. So this is now going to, we're going to print start, and then we're going to print end, and then that's going to be it inside this while loop. So there we have it, start and end, and that's because it hit 0 to begin with, that's our first number, and then our last number is 2, and then that's it. So another thing we can do with while loops is make them infinite. So if you've done any sort of embedded programming, then usually what you do on like an embedded device, you just have a while 1, which just runs continuously. You know, maybe you're looking for inputs or something, and we can do that in Python too. And the way you do that is by just saying while 1 or while true, and this is just going to run this loop indefinitely. It's probably, unless you've got a good reason for it, it's probably not a great idea in Python, but there is some examples where it might be a good idea, which I'll go over in a second. But the reason this goes on indefinitely, of course, is because we haven't got a variable. We haven't got while counter equals true, for example. So there's no way of ever actually changing it. So it's just going to be true always, forever. So what we can do now then is, if you were printing something now, you don't want to do this. This is crazy, because what you're going to end up doing is this is just going to print hello for the rest of time, right? So eventually your computer's RAM would probably just crash, I imagine. So you don't want to do that. But what you can do is you can kind of have an input. So what we could do is inside here we could create a variable, which is kind of a response, and we could make that equal to we're going to convert it to an integer, and then we're going to get an input, and the input is going to be a question, like tell me your favorite number. So we're going to get this response. So what we're going to get with every loop now is we're going to get this question, which is, well, it's a more statement, I suppose. It's a command. Tell me your favorite number. And then what we can say is, and then of course it's going to convert it to an integer. And then what we want to say is if response is equal to, say, 4, then what we want to do is we want to just print your favorite number is 4. And this is quite a fun game. You can actually use like a random number generator. If you imported random, you could actually play around with this. So you could import random, and then what you could say is you could kind of make a number guessing game, but I won't get into that. Maybe I'll make another video if people want to be interested in it. I don't want to overcomplicate things. So we're going to say if response is equal to 4, then we're going to print your favorite number is not that. We're going to say your favorite number is, and we're going to use this dot format because I prefer that. Remember our placeholder is response, right? So response is what the users put in. So if response equals 4, then say your favorite number is response, and you can actually randomly generate that number, like I said. Right, we don't need this counter plus equals 1 anymore. So what's going to happen now is we're going to keep getting this command, tell me your favorite number, tell me your favorite number, until we eventually put the correct number in. Then what's going to happen is it's going to just, if our response is 4, then we're going to print your favorite number is what are your responses, which of course is just going to be 4, and that's it. And then it's going to basically do the same thing over and over. We can break from a loop, but we'll do that in just a moment. So we just go ahead and execute this script now. So tell me your favorite number, 3. Tell me your favorite number, 1. 7, and this will literally go on forever until we put 4, and then it will print your favourite numbers 4. But like I said, we haven't broken out of the loop or anything, so it's just going to keep asking, you know. So if you're on Linux command line, you can hit Control-C, and this is going to interrupt the program. And we can go back to our basics program. And what we want to do is we want to break out of this program. So we do that again, and we put 4, then it's just going to go ahead and break out of that program for us. So it's quite good to use a break, especially if you just want to force your way out of a loop. So all we've done is response equals 4, and then your favourite number is whatever, and then we're going to break out that loop. So we've kind of learned everything about the while loop now, so I thought I'll just include that little section about the using random, and we can make a little game using an infinite loop and just a variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to say random number is equal to random. So we're now using the random library, and we're going to use a module called randint, or a function, sorry, called randint, and inside here we can just put 10. So we're going to get a random number now that's somewhere between 0 and 10, and we can get rid of counter now, we're not actually using that anymore. And we're going to say while true, and then response is going to be the computer telling us guess the correct number. So make sure you define this outside, because otherwise if you put it inside the while loop, then this is going to random num, it's just going to generate a new random number every loop. If you want to do that, then you can do that too. That's just a different game, but it does mean that you have to guess it right on the first go. So we're going to say response is equal to guess the correct number. And what we can do now is if response equals random num, so this is the random number that's generated above here, then you can say you guessed correctly the number was, and then we've got a placeholder, and then we're going to put response, and then we're going to break out of the loop, and that's it. So we're now playing this game, and you can actually make this more interesting if you want. You could make this 100, and then you could start using some if statements saying, because what you can know, of course, is you might not know the number, but you might be able to say something along the lines of if response is less than the number, then we can say if response is less than the random num, then we need to print higher, right? So, and that's basically telling us to guess a higher number, and you can just play around with that. And then we can say if response, we should probably put elif response is greater than random num, then what we want to do is print lower. So right now what's happening is response less than random number? If it's less, then we're saying print higher. Else if response is greater than random num, then we're saying print lower. And then we're saying if response is equal, then we're going to guess correctly. So we put elif. And then all we're going to do is break. So let's try and execute this program. Hopefully it works well. Oh yeah, so randint actually takes a it takes a range, I think. So we want to say should have used rand range. I think if you use rand range, then it's just thingy. But if you do randint, then you need to give it a range, ironically. So guess the correct number. Let's say we'll go with 50 first. So it's saying higher. So let's go 75. It's higher than 75. So I'll go with 90 now. So it's between 75 and 90. So I guess if we go somewhere halfway, then we're going to go roughly to 82. So it's between 75 and 82. I'll go 70. Go 77, and that was our correct number. So we've made a fun little game there, just using a while loop. Yeah, you can probably make this game a bit more interesting. So play around. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.